And in that sense, home rule leads to an efficient allocation of resources. Because if they're prepared to pay a price, then they will not be overspending on a given function. So the starting point is that you have to have decentralization of funding or financing in order to have a meaningful decentralization of functions or expenditure responsibilities. Then how do you achieve decentralization of financing? We talked about the property taxes, and the only reason people talk about property taxes is because this is an immobile base, which is well defined, and you can levy the tax. And I guess you can also argue that the benefits of expenditure programs are positively correlated to the property values in some sense, or the rental values or capital values. You can have the user charges, and whether the user charges are prices or taxes, one can debate. There's a continuum of variation in the design of user charges. At some point in time, they are entirely a form of price, but increasingly, they can become a tax. And I give you an example of Dubai. Dubai has got no taxes, no property taxes, no income tax, no sales tax, no VAT, but they have 3,000, that was the last count. I was working in Dubai in 2007 or 8. At that time, there are 3,000 different user charges. And whether, like if you want to come and work in the city, you need a visa fees. Now, if you want to get a job, you need a job permit fees. To open a shop, you have a shop fees, motor vehicle license fees, this thing and that thing. To get a health card, you need a fees. So they collect all these user charges and they provide a substantial amount of financing. Now, that's one method of financing a city government, which what Dubai is. Singapore is a model where there are user charges, but it is a city-state, but they are funding the city predominantly by broad-based taxes, income tax, GST, personal income tax, payroll taxes, and the biggest source of funding for them is in fact this national pension plan contribution. Every employee and employer contributes 30% of your annual wages into this national fund, and that is a driver for Singapore's economic growth. And that's another model, and that model can be employed at this metropolitan or city level in India or any other country. Now, the two other taxes, which are the ones I want to spend some time on, is octroi and the local body tax in India. I think many people in the morning commented that octroi, including Mr. Mohanty, is a very significant revenue source for 2 or 3 municipalities that depend on it. And it contributes 45 to 50% of their revenues. And it cannot be replaced by any other tax. Now, when the GST was being designed in India and the constitutional amendment was being drafted, initially it was drafted to replace all local or state or the central indirect taxes. At the state and the local level, two important taxes which were to be eliminated when the GST was to be introduced were entertainment tax and octroi. And the constitutional amendment bill was drafted by the law ministry at the 11th hour. One commissioner from one of the states, and you can guess which one it is, Maharashtra, saying that we agree with the constitutional amendment except for this entry about abolition of entertainment tax and octroi. And the argument there was that GST is a tax that is going to be accruing to the center and the states. Municipalities have got no share in GST, and how can they agree to elimination of these two taxes? And I said, the debate was that, but these are such minuscule taxes. Why do you want to continue them? Just to give you an idea, the total revenue at that point in time from entertainment tax was 1,200 crore rupees, which is what, 10 billion rupees, which is less than $200 million. That's for the country as a whole. And that small amount of tax could not be abolished under the constitutional provisions. Octroi was at that point in time 1800 crore rupees. Guess where the tax came from? 1200 crore rupees of that 1800 crore rupees came from one product, and that was crude oil. So, and why the tax? Why the tax on crude oil? It cannot be levied in an open market economy because it will be highly distortionary, because that only applied to crude going into refineries in, say, Mumbai. All of the refineries could buy the crude without this octroi on crude oil. So how could they compete? Answer was very simple. All the refineries buying crude were state monopolies, central PSUs, and the price of crude or price of refined product was regulated. So the municipalities, I don't know if they thought about along those lines, if they impose the octroi on crude, all it does is rob the treasury of the center, because the deficit or the loss to the centrally controlled PSUs will go up, cost of production goes up, but the consumers are not affected, and it has no cascading impact because the price is regulated, and all it does is to result in a greater subsidy from the center to the PSUs. Assam does exactly the same thing. They impose a 5% cess on crude oil going into refineries. Exactly the following same logic. Now, once you deregulate the price of petroleum, this tax cannot be sustained. So I wasn't part of the discussions that Mohanty was referring to on why it is difficult to replace crude, the octroi. But my own feeling is that if the price of, given that this tax is coming predominantly for one or two products like this, it has a finite life. Once you move to market prices for petroleum products, the tax cannot be sustained in a local area. If you impose a tax on all refineries across the country, yes, you can have it. But if the tax is imposed only in a local area, it will be highly distortionary and will put those refineries in a non-competitive position. So that's one example. In the case of entertainment tax, the problems that are arising because of it are just huge. And amount of welfare loss that tax is imposing are not small. Typically what happens is rent-seeking behavior. Every time a new movie theater is built, they give an exemption from the entertainment tax. And the main source of entertainment tax is movie theaters. And in Noida, which is a neighboring town or neighboring suburb from Delhi, the tax on movie admissions is 75%. So if your ticket price is 500, of 500 rupees, 300 rupees odd is coming in taxes. And that tax then is obviously a huge burden on consumers. So what they do is that if you build a new theater, they will waive the tax, and that creates competitive distortions, because an existing theater cannot charge a price higher than the new theater. New theater is able to sell the tickets without this tax, while an old theater is stuck with the tax. So it becomes really a tax on capital, an investment in old capital, as opposed to new theater. Now, Roy, I don't know if you want to call it an indirect way of taxing rents. Are the theaters deriving rental values in some sense? Because they're old theaters, land prices are going up. So in the context of GST, question was, can you find a mechanism of compensating the municipal bodies and have a bargain with them that will get rid of octroi and get rid of entertainment tax and such other levies which are collected by them? The main difficulty in that was, one is the political one, that who should negotiate with the municipalities. the center or the states are the creatures of the states or are the creatures of the constitution where they can negotiate with both governments. And I think my feeling is that that issue was too sensitive for any government to raise. As a result, it was dropped from the table. In the 13th Finance Commission, I did hear at the beginning that the center was going to earmark a part of the GST revenues and put in a separate kitty, which will be allocated to municipalities and panchayats and local governments. I thought that was a fantastic idea because first, it could have created a constituency of support for GST because all the local bodies, all the local governments would have been very enthusiastic in welcoming GST because they'll have now a secure funding for their programs. So rather than it being a negative, to me, it would have been a very positive feature to build political consensus for the GST. In the meantime, while the discussion was going on, and I think the Finance Commission did not proceed with earmarking the GST revenues because the GST itself was in limbo. So they earmarked the divisible pool otherwise and put 1.9% of that into a separate pool for funding the local governments. But if the GST does happen, it's an option worth considering. The key challenge in doing that will be, how do you allocate GST revenues to the municipalities? Do you track actual sales in a given municipal area, or do you simply have a lump sum allocation based on population, maybe aggregate consumption expenditure if you can measure it on a local basis, but don't try to track it invoice by invoice. At the moment, I don't think the infrastructure or the statistical system is well developed that you can track sales for each local area individually. So you really have to allocate that money initially on a formula basis. But over time, it is not unthinkable to develop a system of tracking the sales, or at least for the major metropolitan centers, if not for the smaller rural governments or panchayats as we call them. And if you can do that, to me, that will be one method of funding. So don't look for precise allocation of these broad-based revenues to local governments, but some sort of a formula-based allocation in the beginning. Now, Maharashtra, in the meantime, converted its octroi into local body tax, LBT. The problem with the local body tax is that it's a very bad tax and very difficult to collect and design. And the biggest problem you have is, first of all the businesses now have to maintain their accounts by metropolitan cities. Right now, they maintain their books of accounts where the sales, revenues, and profits are segregated for each state. Now, in order to apply the local body tax at the local level, they have to decompose their accounts for each local body. And that is not a simple procedure. It does require a lot of software development and a lot of tracking of sales and purchases. The second biggest problem is that the tax applies on goods only. Now, what is the definition of a good? That's a very challenging problem in India for the state tax purposes. And I'll give you two examples where this thing became very problematic. Under the Indian jurisprudence, goods include intangible goods. And the two most important examples of intangible goods are prepaid telephone cards and software services. Now, software in some cases can be a product, like a CD for a software. In that case, it's a good, or it could be a service. And there's a big debate about what is a service, what is a good.